The final bit is this idea of finding positive meaning in events. And I think this is particularly when, well, the context in which I'm going to talk about it today is in relation to perhaps the more extreme negative events. So, and I don't want to sort of feel as though any of these ideas today are about making light of the very negative events that people experience from time to time. And again, the example I'm going to draw attention to is Martin Wright, who had a very negative experience. But looking at the extent to which sometimes we can find meaning in some of those events, and maybe even also apply that thinking to the smaller, minor events as well. So when little things go wrong from day to day, is there still a way of finding benefit or finding positive meaning in those situations? So psychologists do talk about this idea of benefit finding. Are there ways in which you can search for the benefits within adversity? Some people find it easy to do that. Some of us find it much more challenging. And I think it is quite a challenge at times. I'll use a couple of examples here. And then, as I say, we're going to do a bit of a recap, a bit of a reminder of the session as a whole. And then we're going to just watch this short interview with Martin Wright. But for example, ill health. Often we might feel as though we all get ill from time to time. Sometimes it's a minor ailment, sometimes it's more serious. But again, it's part of life. We're not always going to be healthy all the time. Sometimes people are able to still find the benefits of having that kind of experience. So maybe that's the challenge for us to see whether or not we can do that. So if you have a period of being maybe off work through ill health, is it an enforced period of rest? If you're needing to take a day off, perhaps sometimes it's longer than that, a week off, sometimes much longer than that even. It means you're having time off because you're needing the rest. It often might be described as an enforced period of rest. The fact you're having the ill health, for some people, is saying, well, it's giving me the sign that I need to take this rest. I need to focus on my health, which is really important. Often when we're not having experience of ill health, we take it for granted. And I'm reminded of this phrase when people say when things are going bad, they go, at least you've got your health. This idea of at least. And there are times, though, when you don't have your health, you can still say, well, at least I have time to have some rest, which I often maybe don't allow myself, or I don't feel as though I'm able to take this time to rest. Sometimes it's an opportunity to take the time to reconnect with what's important, whether that's simply spending more time in your home, something we often don't spend enough time doing if we're constantly going out to work, if that's your situation, or spending time with family, friends, doing things which, again, you neglect and don't feel it's important. So there's ways in which you might be able to find benefit from those kinds of experiences. Another example, because some of the examples I might talk about relate to our work situation, and this is something which has come up in some research I've been doing that's essentially being based upon interviews with people about their career progression. And therefore this idea of redundancy, where maybe a change in structure in the institution or company you're working for, or another company takes over and again it has its impact in terms of a workforce, people are made redundant. Now the experience of redundancy is going to be a negative one. By and large, people would say it's an event which they would rather not have happened to them. It's something which is largely outside of their control. For some people, and this is coming through interviews, people are able to sort of just see the positive meaning within that or find the benefits from it. So, for example, some people see it as a way of discovering it as an opportunity to do something they may have always wanted to do, but not either allow themselves to do it, not felt as though it was appropriate. It would be something where they'd have to actively choose to stop a job, which is paying the bills and covering all the things that need to be covered, and doing something which has a much greater degree of uncertainty, but it's something they would really like to do. It could have been a lifelong dream. The people who are able to deal with things like redundancy most effectively sometimes see it as an opportunity where I've now kind of pushed into a situation where perhaps it's an opportunity for me to try out this thing I've always wanted to try. So again, in both these different situations, it's the way of spotting something meaningful the benefits in that kind of adversity. As I said before, the example I'm going to sort of leave you with, in a minute I'll go over a slide which will give you some suggestions and recap on the ideas we've talked about today. And then I'm going to leave you with this interview with Martine Wright. Now, she was a victim of the London bombings, and as part of those events, she actually lost both her legs. So a hugely catastrophic and traumatic event. The interview itself, I would see as, rather inspiring in terms of talking about her journey, what's happened since then. And when you're watching it, seeing the extent to which some of the ideas we talked about today may be playing a part. And that's obviously a very, very extreme situation. It may well be that we need to draw upon those ideas when we ourselves experience similar or other major events. Also, can they be applied in the smaller events, day to day, week on week, where we experience events which we might describe as being bad luck? In terms of things you can perhaps be thinking about over the next 2 weeks until we get to the final session, and I hope beyond that, I hope these are things might continue into the future. But first we talked about dealing with bad luck. So one of the first things to consider, well, it's an event you're describing as being bad luck or unfortunate, whatever terms you want to use to describe it. To what extent was it beyond your control? Because you might review it as something that maybe I did bring about myself. But if it really was something which was beyond your control, one of those things where stuff happens, how might you explain it? Because even though the events happening to you might have been beyond your control, how you go about explaining it is something which is within your control. You can perceive it as being something which is either your responsibility, or is it something which is outside of you? Is it some degree unstable, so it's not going to apply to situations in the future? Is it specific rather than global? These are potentially more helpful adaptive ways of explaining bad luck events. So in terms of your luck journal, you might reflect on this and think, well, in the past, when things have happened, how would I explain that now, with these kinds of ideas in mind? Or if over these next 2 weeks, things happen, which you think, well, how do I explain that? How do I come up with causal explanations for things that have happened? If and when some things happen, again, this may be something where you reflect on experiences you've had in the past. And this is where I recognise that as part of this overall programme, if you remember back on the consent form, the very beginning when you completed those measures online, saying there could be elements of the project which are asking you to reflect on and think about things which can be challenging. So this is an invitation. At any point, you don't have to be doing these things. And it's a reminder that at any point, of course, you can decide to withdraw from the study. But the whole aim here is that feeling as though it can be beneficial to consider some of these events and think of it using these kinds of strategies. But to what extent could it be worse? So something maybe happened in the past and you think, does this idea of counterfactual thinking, does it help in this situation? Or when events happen over the next few weeks, because we're going to experience bad luck from time to time, it's part of life. To what extent can we think of ways in which it could be worse? How does that help? And even, is there some kind of meaning to be found in this? So when you're experiencing something which might be described as bad luck, where is the meaning here? Is there something I can find? Is there some benefit from this situation? And that's really going to be a theme which we're going to look at when we look at Martine Wright's story. And even some of these other ideas as well, maybe things, does it come across in her account of what's happened to her? So that's essentially the session on what I'm calling Sturkis Accidit. So at this point now I'm going to play the clip of the interview with Martine Wright. And if you're watching this online, that's what I'm going to encourage and invite you to do now. And other than that, we'll see you again in session 6, the final session.